Hi, I'm Danny with Tax 29 Tax Service.
And I'm Andy. You know, Danny, the prices of everything keeps going up and up.
Inflation.
Well, at Tax 29, we said enough. We're keeping our pricing structure the same this year as what we had last tax season.
So whether you file in one of our local offices or whether you file with us online at tax29.com, you'll get the same professional tax prep at affordable pricing along with year-round service.
For a list of our pricing or to find out more, stop by one of our local offices or visit us at tax29.com.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.
Welcome to Discovering His Story, a production of YCTV. I'm Bill Henry. I'm your instructor at this program where we seek to integrate biblical record with secular historical record. And at the same time, see the background of a lot of the customs and history of the Bible, as well as seeing how biblical characters fit into the historical record. We are looking presently at ancient times, and specifically at the time of the Roman Republic. Last time we got into where Hannibal, the leader of the Carthaginian forces fighting against Rome in the Second Punic War. The Punic Wars were wars between Rome and Carthage. The Punic coming from Phoenician, the Carthaginians were Phoenician by ethnicity. Hannibal had led an army from Spain up through France, down through the Alps into Italy, and was largely successful at defeating the Romans in every battle, but unable to overcome the city of Rome. Well, last time we saw that Hannibal was able to get himself out of a fix at Lake Trasimene, and today we're going to see the next battle that takes place as the Roman leadership has been replaced in the Battle of Cannae. This takes place in the spring of 216 BC. Now at this stage, Rome outnumbered Hannibal almost 2-1. Rome had 80,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry to Carthage's 19,000 veterans, 16,000 Gauls he picked up along the way who were unreliable, and 10,000 horses. The Roman legions attacked, forcing Hannibal to rely upon superior strategy to avert defeat. You can see in the diagram here of the battle Hannibal's army in red and the Roman army in blue. Hannibal attacks, you can see in a rather staggered fashion with his lead soldiers up in the middle. Now let me just point out something about fighting battles at this time. This is a picture of how soldiers would hold these long spears, phalanges. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but they would mass against the other side, and it would be a pointy shoving match. Sometimes the cavalry would come in from the side to try to, if you go around the flank, and that would be a goal. But it was pushing your spears against the other side and attempting to throw them off. The phalanx advancing at the charge looked and was formidable because of the phalanx being more compact among the Carthaginians than the Roman maniple. Each Roman trooper faced 2 enemies and 10 projecting spears. But the phalanx needed flat land with no obstacles, and that was seldom to be had in the real world. A single phalangist down in the ranks could disturb the formation and open a gap through which a small party of Romans could enter to unzip the phalanx. So that's a little bit about how battles were fought among the infantry. Well, let's get back to the battle at hand here. Hannibal bulged the center of his line forward, inviting a Roman attack there. So you get the idea. He's moving a lot of his forces in the middle ahead of his other forces, and so that the Romans are going to have to respond to that and pull soldiers there and attack him there. Hoping to break Hannibal's line, dividing his forces, the Romans attacked, forcing the Carthaginian middle then to retreat. However, this was according to Hannibal's plan. Having been drawn into a pocket then, the Romans found themselves hemmed in on three sides. So you can see in the diagram here in the upper, in the middle, the larger part of the diagram, you can see that the center of Hannibal's line is moving forward, and then the second phase up in the upper left, the Roman army engages them, and the third phase, Hannibal's troops fall back. That's showed maybe a little more clearly in this diagram, where Hannibal has fallen back and the Roman army gets sucked in. They think that they're going after a retreating enemy, but what happens? You notice the red dotted lines there. That's the cavalry from Hannibal, who now are able to come around and surround the Roman army. Excellent strategy on Hannibal's part. So the Romans are hemmed in. At the same time, Hannibal's cavalry ran right through the cavalry of Rome and circled around and attacked the rear of the Roman infantry. The surrounded Romans were almost completely wiped out, losing nearly 60,000 men to Hannibal's 6,000. And 2/3 of the 6,000 were Gauls. So they were just guys he picked up when he was on his way towards the Alps. So 60,000 to 6, those are pretty good odds. I think anybody would take them. Now, Will Durant, the historian, says that only 44,000 fell. Still, that's a lot. The 10,000 escaped. Among them was a guy by the name of Scipio, whom we will come across later. Even so, Hannibal was unable to defeat Rome. He lacked the heavy siege equipment and was unable to recruit people under Roman rule because the Romans had treated the people so fairly. The generous treatment of the Roman subjects created a situation where they were unwilling to join against Rome. Well, why should they? In their terror, however, the Roman Senate sanctioned human sacrifice. Got to do something to get rid of Hannibal here. And they actually buried alive 2 Gauls and 2 Greeks. Well, about this time, Rome attacked Syracuse. Whoops, there's Cannae still. Another look at the battle. If you want to review there, Hannibal goes forth, pushing forth the middle. The Romans come against him. He retreats, creating a pocket into which the Romans fight and are surrounded. And this is the lay of the land there at Cannae. All right, so the city of Syracuse at Sicily is attacked by Rome. And Syracuse responds with a barrage of weaponry engineered by the famous mathematician Archimedes, which delayed Rome eventually being able to conquer them. And I thought it'd be interesting for us to take a few minutes to look at Archimedes. What's he famous for? He discovered pi. Not the kind you eat, like pi r squared. the relation of surface and volume of a sphere, water displacement. He invented a number of things, so we'll look at a few of them here. First of all, the Archimedes screw. This was a method to get water from a lower level to a higher level. I mean, that's one of the primary concerns of farmers in a pre-industrial society, was the need to irrigate their land. Before sophisticated pumping systems, you got to find a way to get water up to where the crops are growing. And different cultures had different ways of dealing with this. We saw one in Egypt, ancient Egypt, remember, the shadoof. One solution, which is credited to Archimedes, was the water screw, or screw pump, still used today. The screw-shaped device was rotated by a windmill or through manual labor. Water was lifted inside the spiral tube to a higher elevation as the entire unit rotated. I think I've seen this even at children's museums, someplace where children are given opportunity to play with water, and I've seen one of those there. It was so helpful there that it was carried over to other industries where it's been used to move light materials like grain in and out of farming silos. Archimedes is credited as a person who discovered the principle of buoyancy, which is also known as Archimedes' principle. This states that a body wholly or partially submerged in a fluid at rest is acted upon by an upward or buoyant force, and that the magnitude of this force is equal to the weight of the fluid displaced by the body. Got it? Well, the story goes that Archimedes discovered this principle. You probably are more familiar with the story than the principle. After being tasked by the king to figure out whether a crown made for him was pure gold or whether it contained other metals, Archimedes realized that if he took a lump of gold weighing the same as the gold crown, the two objects should displace the same amount of water, regardless of shape. If the goldsmith who made the crown replaced any gold with a cheaper metal, then the crown would displace more water. According to the story, Archimedes used this idea to prove that the goldsmith had cheated the king out of a rightful amount of gold in the crown. Stories differ on how Archimedes was actually able to discover that the crown wasn't pure gold. Now, something that was more useful in battle was this war machine called the Iron Claw, or the Claw of Archimedes. This machine was thought to have been installed on the seaward-facing walls of the city of Syracuse to protect the city against amphibious assault. The device is only known about through snippets of historical accounts, but it was believed to have been some type of a crane with a grappling hook on one end, which was able to lift attacking ships partly out of the water, and then either cause the ship to capsize or suddenly drop it. It may also have been dropped onto enemy ships to cause them to swing around and destroy themselves. So the Iron Claw. He also invented the odometer. At least he's credited with having the first idea for one, or a mechanical method of keeping track of distance. The Roman engineer Marcus Vitruvius Pollio wrote an account of this idea, which he credited to Archimedes. The odometer operated on the idea that every time a wheel goes around, it travels its circumference. The odometer may have used a large wheel of a known circumference and a series of gears, like we see here. Now, the theory is that a gear on the drive shaft had only one tooth, and a gear holding a box of pebbles had additional teeth. The pebble gear moves one notch whenever the chariot wheel goes completely around. After the wheel had gone enough revolutions to equal 1 mile, the pebble gear would have moved so that a hole leading from the pebble box lined up with a hole underneath the gear, and a pebble dropped into a bucket. Counting the pebbles could tell you how many miles have been traveled. Each dropped pebble represents 1 mile traveled. So that's an early odometer. He didn't invent the pulley system, but Archimedes did develop different systems of compound pulleys, improving on the existing technology that was around at his time. He clearly demonstrated that a wheel supported by a rope could be used as a method of transferring energy, providing the operator with a mechanical advantage in the process. Archimedes developed an efficient block and tackle system, allowing sailors to use leverage to lift heavy objects. He's also credited with finding new uses for the lever. The great inventor supposedly said, "Give me a place to stand on and a lever long enough and I will move the earth," to which he was challenged to prove it. In one story, he was tasked with launching Syracuse's largest ship. Archimedes is said to have accepted the task and utilized a massive lever mechanism along with a series of pulleys to launch the newly constructed ship. Although Archimedes was not the first to conceive of lever mechanisms, he accurately described the underlying physics and explained the ratios of force, load, and how the fulcrum point interacted with the lever's capability. He did a lot in the area of geometry. The Roman historian Plutarch wrote that Archimedes did not hold his mechanical inventions in high regard. Instead, he was much prouder of his proofs and theories in physics and mathematics. The great engineer is credited with proving that the area of a circle is equal to pi multiplied by the square of the circle's radius, pi r squared. Remember that? He also proved that the area enclosed by a parabola and a straight line is 4/3 times the area of a corresponding inscribed triangle. As you can probably tell from this brief list, the inventor had a significant hand in elucidating early physics, mathematics, mechanical design, and even art. He was arguably the most extraordinary polymath ever to live and rightly deserves his place in the history books. Oh, one more thing with which you're familiar. He also discovered the idea of displacement in water, for which he cried out, "Eureka!" in the bathtub as he discovered that, which means "I found it," a term you probably know. Well, there's one other invention that is talked about but not sure really existed. And that is, supposedly he used a giant mirror to reflect light from the sun onto Roman ships, causing them to catch on fire. Now you may remember that principle from maybe a magnifying glass and ants, or maybe you have been in a place where you saw a mirror reflecting light. But the idea that it could actually reflect enough light to start a fire is a little incredulous. In fact, they took up this challenge on Mythbusters, the TV show, and they showed that for a lot of reasons it could not have happened. Primary among them being just being able to focus light onto one spot long enough to start a fire was difficult, especially when the ship is moving. You know, you maybe can do that with a piece of newspaper or something, but a moving ship, you can't keep it on that one spot. And having a mirror large enough, you had to have a lot of small mirrors as a part of that. Anyway, that's part of the legend, but probably not really true. The Roman generals were able to adapt to these unique defense devices by Archimedes and led to the fall of Syracuse. Here's a summary of it. In the year 212, Syracuse was besieged and invaded, and the Romans broke through. As soldiers ran through the city, killing everyone they saw, a soldier came upon Archimedes. He was drawing circles in the sand and staring intently at them. When he saw the soldier come near to his drawing, he said, "Don't disturb my circles." The soldier, enraged, drew his sword and killed him. A rather ignominious end to the life of this famous mathematician and inventor. Well, following the defeat of the Carthaginians in Spain by Scipio, he had been sent there as Hannibal was leaving. Scipio arrived in Spain and defeated the Carthaginians. The Roman commander then was chosen consul. He raised a new army, and instead of fighting Hannibal in Italy, decided to cross over to North Africa and attack Carthage itself. Carthage was a densely populated and well-fortified city. Some houses were 6 stories high, and a family might be crowded into a single room. Around the landward side of the city ran a 3-fold protective wall, 45 feet high, with still higher towers and battlements. Within the wall were accommodations for 4,000 horses, 300 elephants, and 20,000 men. Outside the walls were the estates of the rich, and beyond these the fields of the poor. A lot of people living in and around Carthage. Well, as Scipio was heading toward Carthage, Hannibal knew his duty lay with defending his home city, and so he hurried back to defend Carthage. Although half of his troops refused to go, they had been in Italy so long, they decided they'd just rather stay there. So he returned after 36 years to raise a new army. Hannibal then went out to engage Scipio at a place called Zama. The two leaders met together in an effort to reach a peace settlement, but were unsuccessful. Scipio, however, used that meeting to gain some important intelligence. Meeting halfway between the camps, Scipio observed how many elephants Hannibal had. With this information, Scipio devised a strategy. The Romans arranged themselves in groups behind a row of skirmishers so that there were lanes through their ranks. These lanes corresponded to the number of elephants in Hannibal's army. Hannibal also devised a special strategy. Because the terrain did not lend itself to his usual boxing in tactic, he divided his troops into 4 groups, each under its own commander. The men in his first group rode upon elephants. Get them out there, let them do their smashing, what they do, prepares the way for the next group. The other 3 groups then would follow. Hannibal's tactic was to attack the Romans in waves rather than in one massive assault. Hannibal himself commanded the final wave of attackers, which was composed of seasoned veterans from his Italian campaign. Well, the 2 armies confronted one another near the North African town of Zama. You can see them lined up there. Hannibal's armies in the forefront, ready to take on the Romans. As the 2 sides approached one another, the Romans sounded their trumpets. The soldiers in the forefront of the Roman forces aligned themselves in a V-shaped formation and threw lances at Hannibal's elephants. The noise of the trumpets and the shower of lances sent the elephants into a panic. Some turned and trampled the second wave of Carthaginian soldiers. Others charged forward through the lanes in the Roman ranks as planned. With the elephants no longer a threat, the Romans closed the lanes and fell upon the enemy. The Carthaginians were thrown into disarray as retreating soldiers from the second group collided with the third group moving forward to attack. Trying desperately to escape, the retreating Carthaginians fought both Romans and Carthaginians. Meanwhile, the Roman cavalry drove the opposing cavalry from the field. The situation seemed bleak for Carthage. Hannibal could only hope that his tried veterans, which he still held in reserve, could turn the tide. During a lull in the fighting, the weary Romans regrouped and prepared for Hannibal's final assault. Their long front was twice as wide as Hannibal's approaching force. As the 2 armies met, Scipio's front enveloped the enemy, and the Roman cavalry attacked the Carthaginians from the rear. Thus, Scipio used innovative tactics and Hannibal's own flanking strategy to defeat Hannibal, who lost 20,000 men. Eluding capture, however, Hannibal then got into Carthage, advised the Carthaginian Senate to sue for peace. The Roman leader was later given the title Africanus by the Roman Senate in honor of his great victory, so he became Scipio Africanus. This is a picture of the Roman maniples versus the phalanges. Hannibal won a lot of battles in the Second Punic War because he faced incompetent Roman generals. He started quickly to use Roman captured weapons. And thirdly, he always had more and better cavalry to take the Romans on their flanks and rear. At Zama, Hannibal faced a competent enemy general in Scipio Africanus. He lost the cavalry edge when the Numidian chieftain that was on his side, his hired mercenary from Numidia, Massinissa, defected to the Romans, taking with him 6,000 of the best Numidian cavalry. So the outcome of the Second Punic War is that Rome gained the Iberian Peninsula, or Spain. Carthaginian navy was reduced. They were forced to pay war damages again, 200 talents each year for 50 years, more and longer. And now Rome was the master of the Western Mediterranean world. But you haven't seen the last of Carthage. At the same time, in 174 BC, the streets of Rome were paved, and in 170 BC, the first public bakery opened in Rome. There will be a third Punic War from 149 to 146 BC. This time, the cause is Roman revenge. Carthage became prosperous once again and was perceived to be a threat, especially by the Roman senator Cato. Due to a minor infraction by Carthage, Rome demanded 300 children of the noblest families as hostages, surrender of her remaining ships, a great quantity of grain, all her engines and weapons of war, and that the population move 10 miles inland and the city be burned, which would totally ruin the city forever. Carthage could not abide by these demands and so decided to fight instead. In 149 BC, just as this war gets started, Cato dies. The major event was a 3-year siege led by Scipio, which led to Carthage's defeat when it was utterly destroyed by Rome. The citizens fought street by street as they were trying to defend their city. But ultimately, they surrendered and were destroyed. It's interesting that what Cicero tells us about the destruction of Carthage. This is a picture of Scipio looking over the city, and this is what Cicero says. Scipio looked over the city, which had flourished for over 700 years since its foundation, which had ruled over such extensive territories, islands, and seas, and been rich in arms, fleets, elephants, and money as the greatest empires. And yet, he had a hard time destroying it. In fact, at the end, he said, "This is a glorious moment, and yet I'm seized with fear and foreboding that someday the same fate will befall my own country." And so the Third Punic War comes to an end, this with the siege of Carthage, and the Romans have won 3 out of 3 of the Punic Wars. Next time we'll see what happens to Rome as they begin to master the Eastern Mediterranean.
What's the real story? How did all of this come to be? Was it all by chance, or did something or someone design everything? Join us as we learn from our host, William Henry, and discover that the story of the Earth and our universe is really his story.